by spending more money, by leading us deeper into debt, and that was going to usher in an even bigger financial crisis where they destroyed the value of our money. And that's where we're headed right now. We're going to wipe out the value of the dollar. And that is the bigger crisis that's in our future if we don't act soon. It's not a question of losing your money. It's a question of your money losing its value. Because the financial crisis of 2008 was the result of what the Federal Reserve did in 2001 and 2002 and what Congress did under the leadership of George Bush. You see, we had a bubble in the stock market in the 1990s. And I was very familiar with that bubble as well, because when I started my brokerage business, see, initially I worked for Lehman Brothers, I worked for a major Wall Street firm, and I didn't like it. I didn't think that individuals were getting a fair shake, so I started my own firm. And one of the first things that I did was I was warning people about the NASDAQ bubble. I said people were, being led astray. They were falling into the dot-coms were a scam. They were going to collapse. People were going to lose a lot of money. And I spent over 2 years just cold calling people, trying to convince them to sell their dot-com stocks, because I understood the problems in that bubble. And when the bubble burst, we should have had a pretty severe recession. After all, we made a lot of mistakes during that bubble. We invested a lot of money in companies that never should have been funded. And so people had to lose their jobs because they were working for companies that weren't viable. People had to lose money because they invested in companies that weren't viable. There was going to be some transitionary pain as we reallocated those resources away from dot-com companies, where they never should have been, to other areas of the economy. And that transition was going to be a recession. And it should have been pretty painful. But unfortunately, government decided that they were going to fight the recession. They were not going to let the market cure the economy from the disease that it was suffering from. So we stimulated. We stimulated the economy with cheap money. Alan Greenspan put interest rates to 1%, and we ran up some deficits. And what did we do? What did the stimulus do? It inflated a housing bubble. It got Americans to spend trillions of dollars they didn't have to buy products we couldn't afford. We bought houses we couldn't afford. We overpaid for houses. And then we remodeled them with stuff we couldn't afford. We borrowed trillions of dollars. Our trade deficit went up to $60 billion a month, and our savings rate went negative. We had a wild consumption party because of misguided government policy. Now we're broke. We spent ourselves into oblivion. The chickens have come home to roost, and we're now suffering the consequences of the economic stimulus of Alan Greenspan and George Bush. Now, what are we doing? Obama learned nothing from the mistakes under Bush. Bernanke has learned nothing from the mistakes of Greenspan, because we're repeating every one except on a larger scale. The fiscal policy under Obama, makes what we did under George Bush. George Bush, was a saint compared to what's happening with Obama. The deficits are 4 or 5 times what we had under Bush. And the monetary policy with Ben Bernanke is completely insane. Interest rates aren't just 1%, they're 0. They're giving the money away. And they're giving it away to Wall Street. And the Federal Reserve has bought over $1.5 trillion worth of toxic assets from banks that should have failed because they were stupid enough to invest in that stuff in the first place. And now we own it as taxpayers. And we've debased our money. And we set ourselves up in a situation now where we are completely dependent as an economy on 0% interest rates. But how can an economy function with no interest rates? Because if interest rates are 0, who's going to save? Nobody. No one's going to save to earn 0. And if no one's going to save, where's the capital going to come from? Where's the growth going to come from? It's not. We've got nothing. You can't have a society where nobody saves and nobody makes things. So we are setting ourselves up. The come down from this artificial high that we're getting from this stimulus is going to be much worse. Much, much worse. And I want to make sure that I'm in the Senate, when it hits the fan, because it's coming soon. And I want to make sure that we don't make the same mistake a third time. Because that's it, we're out if we do it again. We will destroy the economy completely because the currency will be wiped out. And then every American is going to feel that. We're going to wipe out the middle class. We're going to wipe out the value of everybody's savings. We're going to wipe out the value of everybody's pensions, of everybody's life insurance. We're going to wipe out the value of everybody's wages because we are going to destroy our money because there will be nobody left to buy our bonds. The only thing we'll have is Ben Bernanke buying up the government bonds by creating money. And you have runaway inflation. And somebody needs to go to the United States Senate and convince the people that are there and the congressmen that they need to do the exact opposite. Everything that they've done since this crisis began has been the exact opposite of what we need to do. Right? We're in a gigantic hole because we spent too much money. We don't get out by spending more. We have to spend less. Right? We didn't save enough, so we got to save more. And that's not just individuals. That's the government. The government has to spend less. Because even if individuals, if we save more, if the government just runs up the deficits, it wipes out the savings that we do. Because the government is borrowing in our name. So we've got to change that. We've got to restore sanity to our monetary policy. We have to have a real interest rates. We can't have artificially low interest rates. We have to let interest rates rise, and we have to let firms fail. If firms cannot stay in business, if they're not profitable, they have to fail. There's nothing wrong with failure. It's part of capitalism. You can't tax the successful to prop up the failures. Then it's like a reverse Darwinism. You can't have survival of the unfittest. Capitalism doesn't work that way. You can't reward failure because then you get more of it. We have to reward success, but we're punishing success right now. So that has to change. And one of the other reasons that I want to go to the Congress, apart from the fact that I'm the only one in the Senate, or would be, that understands economics and doesn't need to listen to the advice of advisors who pretty much don't know what they're talking about anyway. But I understand business. I mean, I've been in business my whole life. I said I started my company when I left Lehman Brothers. I was a one-man guy. I worked out of my one-bedroom apartment. I now have 100 employees. I have 6 offices. And I tell you, I have a lot more employees. If it wasn't for all the government bureaucracy and all the red tape that I have to live with every single day that is stifling my ability to expand my business and hire new people. So I understand where jobs are created, why they're created, and why they're not created. I understand firsthand experience how government regulations stifle employment and economic growth. The problem is none of the people in Congress writing legislation have any experience abiding with it, complying with it. They have no idea how much it costs. They just pass the stuff and there it is, They don't understand the damage that it does because they never have to live with it. So I want to come there with a fresh perspective of understanding the damage that they're doing to the economy because I've lived it. And we need to have people that are there that don't want to be there, that aren't career politicians, that aren't looking, at a poll before they make a decision. I figure 1 6-year term is pretty much all I really need. So I'm not going to worry about trying to get reelected. I figure I got 6 years. If we can't turn the situation around in 6 years, it's too late. If we're on this track for 6 more years, the collapse will have already happened. So if I can succeed in 6 years, then great, I don't have to stay there anymore. And if I can't, well then there's no reason to be there because the time to have acted would have passed. So we need to have somebody to go to Washington, again, who is committed to these principles. There are a lot of people who are now talking the talk. There are a lot of people running in the Republican Party that are promising to cut government, to reduce government. But you know what? I don't trust them because I've heard these lies before. They get into office and they don't do anything. The minute they get there, they act just like the Democrats. They're in power. They want to stay in power, and they don't want to tick anybody off. They want to get all the special interest money. They want to get reelected, and so they do what politicians do. They grow government. They expand their power, and if they want to talk about small government, it's only as a means to get reelected so they can keep growing it. I don't want to do that. I wish I didn't have to go to Congress. I'm not looking forward to it. It's going to be very difficult for me to step into that lion's den and try to educate 99 other senators that probably don't want to string me up the minute I show up there. So they don't want to be held accountable. They don't want somebody to challenge them to actually put their re-elections at stake, to actually do what's right for the country. But I'm going to try to challenge them to do that, and I'm going to take the time, one senator at a time, to educate them to understand economics, to understand the gravity of the situation that we're in, and that they have to step up to the plate and actually do something for the country. And not just something to perpetuate their own careers. Anyway, I want to thank you for inviting me here, and I'd like to take your questions on any of the issues.